One of the issues that I think there's general agreement that is vital to Scotland's interest is being a member of the single market. And on the 13th of July, you said that you wanted to ensure that Scotland got the best deal. And to quote you, you said clearly that involves being part of the single market. Is that still your view?
My view is that we want to maximise our involvement in the single market. That is the objective that the government wants to achieve. But what I've also said, what the Prime Minister's said, is that it is not appropriate to look at existing structures, because going forward, what the UK is looking to achieve is a bespoke deal, a deal that is the best for the UK, including the best for Scotland, but it is bespoke. It's not about having an arrangement that already exists. It's about doing something new and different, and that's the outcome that we're looking for. So I'm looking for an outcome that allows the UK businesses to participate in the single market without tariffs and without barriers.
So you want full membership of the single market in the sense that you want no tariffs or barriers. That's what the European negotiators have already said, that that's not possible.
Well, what I also know is that we're not going to conduct this negotiation in public, and the European negotiators and everybody under the sun are going to have their two penneth worth as we go through the next 2 years, and we'll read all sorts of quotes from all sorts of people about what's not possible and what is possible. And what we as the UK government is not going to do, we're not going to conduct these negotiations in public. What, as the Prime Minister has set very clearly out, we are focused on the outcomes. Now, obviously, an outcome which maximises our involvement in the single market is a desirable outcome, and that's what we're looking to achieve.
There's a big difference between maximising your involvement in the single market and being in the single market with all the benefits that that brings.
We're leaving the EU, and therefore, in that sense, we will be out with the current EU structures. What the negotiations will determine is what our relationship will be with those EU structures. And all those issues, as far as I am concerned, as far as the UK government is concerned, is open for negotiation.
I'll pass on to Lewis McDonald. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'd be eager to explore a little further what you mean when you talk about a bespoke agreement, because clearly that's what we're all focused on, is what the outcomes are going to be. And a bespoke agreement suggests to me something that's tailored, something that's designed to fit our needs. How will that bespoke design be arrived at? What will be the process for determining what a bespoke agreement might look like?
Well, the process will be the negotiations. Clearly, the Prime Minister set out, and the committee is aware of the timetable for triggering Article 50 when the substantive negotiations will begin. What is envisaged, and David Davis set this out when he was in Scotland last week, is that there would be a single agreement for the whole of the United Kingdom, but that doesn't mean that within that agreement there can't be specific issues that would relate to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. There won't be a Scotland-only agreement or a Wales-only agreement, Northern Ireland-only agreement. There will be a United Kingdom agreement, but that agreement can include differential arrangements in different parts of the United Kingdom if, as part of the negotiation process, that is seen as to be the best way forward.
Very interesting, and the implication of quite a lot of what the Prime Minister's had to say recently is that that tailoring would be very specific around particular sectors. There's been talk, for example, of the City of London and finance. There's been talk of the car industry in the north and indeed the Midlands of England. What talk has there been around Scotland? What, if the Prime Minister asks you, which I'm sure she does, what is it that Scotland needs out of this process? Where do you start that conversation?
Firstly, I wouldn't believe all the media speculation that it exists around special deals. David Davis confirmed when we met businesses in Glasgow last week, there isn't currently a plan for a special deal for the city or for the car industry. There will be issues that those industries have, very specific industries. We know that there are issues in relation to the financial services around passporting, for example. So there are very specific issues to specific industries, but there won't be special deals, and it's absolutely wrong to characterise a suggestion that somehow certain areas or parts of the country will get a special deal and Scotland will not. What will happen for Scotland is that we will get the deal that we need to meet our interests and concerns. Now, I've been engaged myself along with my colleague Lord Nunnall, in over 50 discussions with all sorts of sectors across Scotland. I think a fairly wide cross-section, as well as a geographic cross-section, because in Scotland it's particularly important that we ensure that the whole geography of Scotland is incorporated. And what I'm doing at the moment is I've fed back to the Prime Minister, for example, the issues and concerns that come up in that process. But as I indicated in my initial remarks to the conveners, a number of issues that impact on Scotland also impact on other parts of the United Kingdom. So there are other sparsely populated, for example, there are other sparsely populated areas of the United Kingdom where there would be a desire for in-migration. There are areas of the United Kingdom where seasonal agricultural work is important, as well as here in Scotland, for example. So that those sort of issues need to be can be dealt with on a UK-wide basis, whilst at the same time very much dealing with a specific Scottish issue.
When you responded, when you began the answer, Secretary of State, you used the phrase special deal. That wasn't the phrase I'd used. I'd simply been...
I know you didn't, Mr MacDonald, but I have seen that phrase bandied about.
I was seeking to understand your own phrase, which was differential arrangements. What do differential arrangements mean, for example, in relation to financial services, for example, in relation to fisheries, for example, in relation to the motor industry? How do these differential arrangements arrive as part of that bespoke package?
Well, how they arrive is as part of our ongoing discussion and dialogue with these sectors to identify exactly what the most important issues and concerns are for the sector, so that we can understand the importance and the prioritisation they have on particular issues and feed that into determining the negotiating process.
Clearly, when it comes to designing that, to reaching that conclusion, the role of the person or persons determining which of those differential arrangements are in the package becomes absolutely critical. And so I guess I return to the convener's line of questioning around your role and how it is that the Scottish Government or the Scottish Parliament can be reassured about your engagement in finalising the stitching together of those differential arrangements into that wider package.
Well, ultimately, we're all judged on what we achieve and what the final outcome is. But I give you an absolute assurance. I am committed to ensuring that Scotland's best interests are achieved in this deal. I think that we can get a deal that can both represent the best interests of Scotland and of the United Kingdom as a whole. And I'm positive about that. I'm going into this process on a positive basis to ensure that our issues and concerns are right up at the top of the agenda. But clearly, the other, as I've indicated, a lot of issues and concerns that we face in Scotland are issues which are evident across the whole of the United Kingdom and need to be resolved on that basis.
Thank you very much. Just one other point. The European Commission, in setting the grounds on which Michel Barnier is to negotiate from the other side of the table, has specifically picked out Northern Ireland and Gibraltar as territories where a particular approach requires to be taken. Would you like to put on the record your understanding of what that means? What is it that requires the European Commission to approach discussions around Northern Ireland and Gibraltar on a different basis from the discussions around the other component parts of the United Kingdom.
The specific issue is, of course, that both those areas have a land border with European Union member states.
And is there not also a legal aspect to this, particularly in relation to other treaty obligations the UK has undertaken?
There are specific issues in both cases, but the geography is also a significant element in that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you have a supplementary? If you could just be as quick as possible.
This theme, Secretary of State, in terms of the different asks that are going to be conveyed to the UK government from around the UK, in Scotland our position is different. We have a government of our own with a policy position. We have a parliament and we have 62% of the population who voted to remain within the European Union. And you are, after all, Scotland's voice in the UK cabinet. Therefore, I assume it's Scotland's priorities at the foremost of your mind. Do you therefore agree that Scotland does have a distinctive case and a voice to be heard in these negotiations, especially in relation to access and membership of the single market, and it would be unacceptable if these needs were not taken into account in asks by the UK government?
Scotland has two governments. It has a government here, the devolved government, and it is part of the United Kingdom and is represented by the United Kingdom government. Scotland gets the best deal when those two governments work together in a team UK approach. That's what I am committed to achieving. I'm absolutely committed to ensuring that all the issues, concerns, asks of the Scottish Government are part of developing our negotiating process. I'm pleased that we've made progress, and you've previously yourself, Mr Lochhead, been involved in the workings of the joint ministerial committees, and you know how challenging it can be to bring all three devolved administrations, UK government together. So it's taken slightly longer than I would have hoped. But we've got a process now which will allow the Scottish Government and Scottish Government officials as well behind the scenes to be right at the heart of the process. And I think we've got the first meeting of that joint ministerial committee European negotiations coming up in early November. Market access, an issue that we've already touched on, will be on the agenda. There's a lot of work going on to determine the work programme for that. So I don't have any doubt that Scotland's issues, concerns, asks will be at the heart of this process.
Jackson Carlaw.
Secretary of State, that kind of leads slightly and covers slightly the area I'd like you to discuss, and that is to say a little bit more about the formal structures that are going to underpin the engagement that will take place between the Scottish Government and Westminster and the Scottish Parliament, indeed, and Westminster. How would you characterise the outcome of the meeting that took place on Monday? Just the formal structures that you've alluded to, what you think they will depend upon in order for there to be a productive and successful dialogue and outcome. And you've mentioned the fact that market access will be on the agenda, although you don't propose to give a running commentary. But is that in itself a reflection of the importance that has been attached to that issue by the devolved administrations who have been seeking to identify the areas that will be discussed?
Obviously, goodwill is at the heart of any process where parties are working together. I have to say that I've had a very, very positive working relationship with Mr Russell to date. Obviously, I know Mr Russell well of old, and he has acted in a very constructive manner to date. That's why I'm very keen, following a discussion that we had recently, that we engage in some joint activity. I think it's very important to do that, the two governments doing that together. There's little point in me, in evidence gathering, so to speak, and finding that we have contradictory evidence, for example. Let's work together and see what the sectors are saying. Let's share information, and that's very much what this process is about. It's about both bringing officials together, but importantly, bringing the political part of the government together as well. The committee will meet regularly, probably monthly. It will meet throughout the process of the negotiations and will be, it will discuss the negotiations as the negotiations proceed. Obviously, in the period up until the end of March, when the Prime Minister set out that Article 50 will be triggered, its focus will be on the process, on that process and the beginning of the negotiations. But there will be full, there will be full and frank discussion. I have no doubt about that, but I also don't have any doubt that the Scottish Government voice will be heard in the process.
And just the point I asked about the fact that market access is to be on the agenda of the first meeting that's coming up, does that reflect the priority that's been attached to that by the devolved administrations? Is that why it's there? And how do you sort of see the work programme of that group developing?
The work programme is going to be brought together by the respective administrations. There's a lot of detailed work going on in relation to achieve that, because it is a very tight timetable to work to. And what the Prime Minister has assured the First Minister and others is that the timetable of that committee will dovetail into other developments. So the committee will discuss, for example, the Great Repeal Bill, which is the piece of legislation which is proposed that would mean the repeal of the European Communities Act. The committee will discuss that at the point before that is finalised, so that there's full engagement in that process. So we will dovetail the activities of the GMCEN with other developments as they unfold. Both sides and the other devolved administrations believe market access is a very important issue, and I think that's why it's going to be the first issue that's going to be discussed.
Okay, thank you.
On that point, how many meetings of the GMCEN will there take place before Article 50 is triggered?
I can't I can't answer that question in a definitive way. At the moment, it's anticipated that the committee would meet on a monthly basis. But if more meetings are required, then there's a flexibility to do that. Likewise, there's flexibility to have less meetings. What is also proposed, and I'm very, very supportive of this, because I do think that it was most unfortunate that the JMCP, which is the meeting of First Ministers and the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland with the Prime Minister, took so long to come about. There were a whole range of administrative reasons from all sides that didn't happen. But it's been agreed that will meet more regularly, and that there'll be a meeting of that forum early in the new year as well. Right.
If it was monthly, then you're talking about 4 meetings before Article 50 is triggered. So that doesn't sound all that many to me. If
the participants want to have more meetings, there isn't a restriction on the number of meetings. I'm just reporting what the envisaged timescale is.
Okay, thank you very much.
If I may, Convener, on the process points that have been discussed, can I take it that when Article 50 is triggered, Secretary of State, there will be a UK position?
There will be a UK position going into the negotiations, but that position in specific terms will not be announced in the sense of a running in the running commentary basis that I've alluded to, or the sense of us making absolutely clear what our negotiating position was on issues. I think that what you can anticipate, because there will be the process of triggering Article 50 will involve a communication with the EU, and that will set out UK priorities.
I understand that, and believe me, I have heard the phrase running commentary more than I'd ever want to hear it ever again. But what I was driving at is, it is therefore safe to assume that at that point that Article 50 is triggered, Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast will know what that position is.
I would anticipate, yes.
Okay, thank you. The question I actually wanted to ask was on environment, fisheries and
yes.
Agriculture. When we came into this place in 1999, as Richard and Lewis did too, when I read the Scotland Act at that point, they're devolved. In whatever happens in the future, they'll remain devolved, won't they? Fisheries, agriculture and environment will be the responsibility of this institution.
There'll be no change to existing arrangements other than in the context of leaving the EU does automatically change the devolved settlements, because the devolved settlements are based or predicated on the basis that the UK is a member of the EU. So it is clear that there will be a range of changes flowing from that in terms of relationship and a range of options. What I'm committed to do in relation to those options is to engage with all those interested parties in Scotland. I think it's very important we do that. That's what we've done in relation to previous the devolution settlements, both back in the settlement that preceded the establishment of this Parliament, the Calman Commission and the Smith Commission. All of those were heavily consulted on and proceeded on the basis of engagement. So I'm not proceeding at the moment on the basis of a fixed presumption. I very much understand the point that you make. You will be aware, that there are other interests that suggest different options. I think we need to look at the options and engage fully, and that's what I'm committed to do.
I understand that, but politically it would be impossible to imagine a fisheries policy for Scotland being determined in Westminster, given it's been determined in Edinburgh by no other than Richard Lochhead for the last, and for that matter Ross Finney for the last since devolution in 1999.
I couldn't envisage that there would be a change to the existing arrangements.
No. Okay, thank you.
Okay, on that point, you'll be aware, Secretary of State, that this committee commissioned research work from Professor Alan Page at Dundee University, and he made the point that after Brexit, there was a possibility, a very strong possibility, that Scottish law, which was European law, could be repealed using secondary legislation at Westminster, abandoning the presumption that there would be consultation with this Parliament. Do you envisage that we'll have to go back into the devolution settlement to make sure that that doesn't happen?
What I envisage happening in relation to the Scots law issues is obviously the two governments working very closely together to ensure that there are no legal difficulties. Firstly, at the point that the UK leaves the EU, that that the body of existing EU law applies from that day, so we don't reach a situation where there is any uncertainty as to what the law is, and that will be a key component of the Great Repeal Bill. And there's already been discussions with the Scottish Government's, initial discussions with Scottish Government's legal advisers as to how that process can be best taken forward. And because it is a complex, it is a complex process, and that process will go forward on the basis of cooperation. There will not be any suggestion that there's no suggestion that laws that have been passed here in Holyrood would in some way be overridden by decisions taken at Westminster. Right,
because it was not a matter of between the two governments. I think the point that Professor Page was making is that this Parliament should always have scrutiny, and there shouldn't be an arrangement where using secondary legislation laws can be changed without consulting this Parliament.
I would say, I mean, I'm very happy, Ms McAlpine, to give you an undertaking that no laws will be changed of the type that you refer to without consultation, with this Parliament, and we want to now work through the process, because there are a whole, I think, as Professor Page would allude to, there are a whole range of instruments that may have passed which make reference to the EU, which may need to be changed, and we need to find a way in which that is done. Not in a way that changes the substance of what they do, but just to ensure their continuing validity.
Okay. Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Secretary of State. I've heard a few things this morning from yourself, such as that you want to maximise involvement in the single market and looking for a bespoke deal. I'm a bit unsure, certainly just in terms of the whole issue of free movement. But can you tell me what your current position is, please, on whether you do support or don't support free movement to Scotland?
What I support is that it will be for the United Kingdom to determine who enters the United Kingdom from the European Union. So there are two elements to this process. One is bringing back the control of immigration from the EU to the United Kingdom, and then the second part of that is determining what policies that we have within the United Kingdom in relation to who comes to the United Kingdom.
This week, I attended the Cross-Party Group in Science and Technology event on Tuesday evening. And at that meeting, it was highlighted that 16% of academics in the UK are from the EU, 12% of academics are non-EU. Last night, I attended the RCN event here in the Parliament, and it was put to me that 33,000 NHS nurses alone are non-UK. Mm-hmm. And also this week we heard from Professor Sir Timothy O'Shea indicating that Brexit ranges from bad to awful to being catastrophic. Mm-hmm. And from a Scottish perspective, we have last year, in 2015, the first marine tourism strategy was published, and that's about really kind of promoting and increasing the tourism, the opportunity across Scotland for sailing and boating. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the aspects of that is about encouraging people to come from elsewhere, particularly Northern Europe, other EU member states. So if we don't have free movement, notwithstanding the academics, the nurses, and also the other elements in terms of students and other academia through universities, as well as the range of boating and sailing activities, how are we going to really fully benefit if we don't have free movement?
I think that, I think there are two separate points. As I've said, the objective in the negotiations is to return control of immigration from the EU to the UK, so that we can determine ourselves who comes to the UK from the EU. We already have, existing immigration arrangements in place for non-EU citizens. It doesn't mean that we're going to go from a position of having a very significant number of people come from the EU to having no people. There are already all sorts of criteria that currently exist, particularly in relation to specified occupations where there is a shortage of skills. And that is I think, certain to continue. So it will be about establishing our own immigration system in relation to the EU. I have this week or last week I participated in the inquiry which your colleagues, Westminster colleagues on the Scottish Affairs Select Committee are currently pursuing about inward migration to Scotland. And I think that is a very worthwhile and significant inquiry, because one of the things that's clear at the moment is that of the people who currently come to the United Kingdom, in rough terms, only 3 or 4% of those people come to Scotland. So a very, very small number of people who are coming to the United Kingdom come to Scotland. And we need to understand why that might be, how we can go about making Scotland a more attractive place for people to want to come to. I think that's a fundamental part of it. But in relation to your question, there is no intention to stop people coming completely from the European Union. But what we will have is our own immigration system to determine who comes.
Well, I'm sure, Secretary of State, if you want to speak to a family in the Highlands, they'll tell you why they wanted to come to Scotland. But secondly, just in terms of the boating and the sailing aspect, are you suggesting, therefore, if we're going to have our own separate immigration system, that there's a potential that we could then see some type of border controls at the marinas, not just in Scotland but across the UK?
In terms of border controls, I would hope that we don't have to have border controls at marinas across Scotland. I want people to come here, but we also have to ensure that we don't have, as at the moment, we don't have abuse of the system. As I understand it, for example, Border Force keeps a very close eye on all ports within Scotland, just in case people are using those ports to breach the current rules.
Thank you.
A supplementary from Emma Harper.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State. Good morning. It is related to borders. What discussions have you had with colleagues for Northern Ireland over how solutions for the issue of the Ireland and Northern Ireland border will impact on travel, similar to what Stuart McMillan has said, like to and from Northern Ireland from Stranraer, for instance? Can you guarantee that there will be no border controls at Stranraer?
There are two, I think there are two issues there. Obviously, the common travel area with Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom has existed, I think, from about 1923. So it's something that has preceded our membership of the EU and Ireland's membership of the EU, and it's something that the government has made clear that we want to continue. We want to continue to be able to have the arrangement that currently exists, and I think that clearly is the position of the Irish government as well. So there are detailed discussions which have already begun as to how that can be achieved. If that's achieved, there shouldn't need to be I can't envisage why there would need to be border controls at Stranraer. But as you're aware, over a period, many people have expressed concern about the access to the UK mainland through Stranraer, and that perhaps people had come in through that route who might not have got into the United Kingdom if they had chosen other ways to do so. But we're committed to looking to ensure that the common travel area can stay in place, and detailed discussions are ongoing at the moment as to how that can be achieved.
Just to be clear, do you rule out border controls at Stranraer?
I can't envisage any circumstances in which there would be border controls at Stranraer.
So no border controls in Ireland or between Ireland and Scotland? That's
what we want to ensure, that we can keep the common travel area as it is at the moment. But I can't preempt those negotiations, because they not only obviously involve the UK government and the Irish government. There will be a degree of requirement for the other member states of the EU to agree to such an arrangement. But it is an important component of our discussions currently between the UK government and Irish government.
Very quickly.
Yeah, just on that, clearly you've referred to the common travel agents area and the prospect of continued free movement of people across the Irish border and between Ireland and the United Kingdom. That's quite a different matter from the single market, and does that mean that if we're not members of the single market, that the negotiation must encompass both free movement of people and an end to free movement of goods and services?
I think that no one would want to go back to any of the borders of the past that have existed in Ireland, and that it would be an aspiration to ensure that there were none.
Including the movement of goods and
Indeed.
services.
Okay. Move to Ross Greer now.
Thanks very much, Convener. There seems to be a tension here between the British government's position that it needs to take back control of our borders and the willingness to ensure that there are not border controls. The Irish government yesterday dismissed ideas that there could be essentially British border controls in Dublin, and discussion here of discussions between the two governments. To quote the Taoiseach, we do not yet know what the British government is actually looking for here. There seems to be quite a hard tension to resolve. But to go back to Lewis McDonald's point, does the UK government accept that to take back control of our own borders, of our own immigration policy, we would have to do so from out with the single market, as has been repeatedly stated to us?
I don't. Well, I accept on one level, if we're leaving the EU, then essentially we are leaving the single market. But our access to the single market, I think, can continue in a way that doesn't involve tariffs or barriers, and still be able to control immigration from the EU in this country. Clearly, that's something that we should aspire to achieve as part of these negotiations.
I think that other leaders from the rest of Europe have made it exceptionally clear that the tension between those 2 points is perhaps unresolvable. But moving on to the economic impact on Scotland, this committee commissioned a paper from the Fraser Vallenster Institute looking at the potential economic effects. Its pessimistic scenario had in the region of 80,000 job losses and a £2,000 drop in average wages over the next decade. I was wondering if you could outline a little bit what the UK government's evidence-based approach is to deciding what is in the best interests of the Scottish economy.
I'm pleased to find that not all pessimistic forecasts come to pass, because the forecast for our GDP today was going to be -1, and it's actually plus 0.5. So,
with all due respect, Brexit hasn't started yet.
Well, I think it has, in the sense that the decision's been taken, the process has begun, and impacts are being felt. There are other people who would argue that people are already feeling some impact, some positive, some negative. I think what the GDP figures indicate is that our economy is strong and resilient. There is going to be turbulence. There's no doubt about that. The Chancellor will, in his autumn statement in November, I'm sure, bring forward a number of specific proposals. But I think that we can be confident that we have a strong and resilient economy. And there are difficult circumstances at the moment for some businesses, but other businesses are taking the opportunity of the lower value of the pound. Businesses that agricultural businesses, for example, and tourism businesses, in terms of the number of people who are coming into Scotland and the rest of the UK. So there are going to. I'm not denying in any way that there's going to be turbulence, but there are also going to be positives as well.
On that note, taking aside the UK government's view on the value of expert advice, the expert advice and forecasting seems to be a debate on the range of how negative the impact is going to be. Even the most optimistic scenarios still had strong negative impacts on our economy. In that case, I can only presume that the UK government believes there are non-economic benefits to Scotland taking part in what seems to be a hard Brexit position that's being adopted. Could you outline what the non-economic benefits are in the UK government's view?
I don't think that terms like hard Brexit and soft Brexit are really relevant. They're banded around. But actually, as I explained to the convener in my opening remarks, what we are looking for is a bespoke deal for the United Kingdom and for including Scotland that gets us the best possible arrangement. So it's not a hard Brexit or soft Brexit option. It's about getting the best deal, which is outcome based, and that's what the Prime Minister is focused on achieving, and that's what we have to work towards. There'll be lots of noises off. We're going to hear lots of things said by all sorts of European leaders, the European Commissioner, academics, goodness knows who else, about why we can't have this or why we can't have that. But what the deal will be is what is actually achieved in the negotiations, and I'm confident and positive about our ability to achieve a good deal in those negotiations.
I hope we're not sick of that expert advice and the UK government will take it on board.
Well, what I can assure you is that all the we're aware of all the contributions that have been made to this committee, and I think it's been a very valuable exercise in the sense of the engagement that you've achieved. And obviously we're aware of the views that have come in through that. We're aware of what experts say, but we're also focusing on what real people say and what businesses and organisations across Scotland say.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.